What kind of pranks do flight instructors play on student pilots? I'll explain it all. Coming up. Hey 7-4 crew, welcome back. If you don't know me, my name's Kelsey. I'm a 747 pilot. My channel, 7-4 Gear, is all about aviation. Today, this is the view from my hotel room. Let me know in the comment section where you think I'm at, and towards the end of this video, I'll tell you exactly where I'm at. After the video I did on pranks that pilots pull on flight attendants, I got a lot of messages on my Instagram giving me prank ideas that flight attendants had pulled on new flight attendants, flight instructors had pulled on pilots, pilots had pulled on mechanics. I got a bunch of messages, so I thought, obviously, this is going to become a thing. In this video, I'm going to go over 5 different pranks that flight instructors pull on student pilots. Let's get into it. I want to explain to you flight instructors, before you do any of these pranks, remember that these students are your customers. So some people are going to receive pranks well, some people aren't going to feel well if they're pranked. So just keep that in mind and realize that aviation is a very small world, so who you're pranking today may end up being your chief pilot in 5 years. Just keep that in mind. One of the first things that you learn as a new pilot is how to do a walk around. A walk around is where you inspect the aircraft, make sure everything is safe and the aircraft is going to be safe to fly. One of the things that you check on your walk around is this. This is a pitot tube. Now the pitot tube does a few different things depending on the aircraft that you're flying, but let's just say in general it monitors the airspeed. So on this prank, while you're walking around and you're teaching your student how the different things work and showing them what to inspect, when you get to the pitot tube, what you do is this. You say, great, now we're going to check the pitot tube, make sure it's working. I'm going to go sit in the plane. I need you to put your mouth over it and then blow on it. So you go sit in the plane and you tell them, okay, I'm ready. During that time, you pull your phone out and you record them blowing on the pitot tube. Once they put their mouth around it and they're basically giving their plane a blowy, you, of course, have your phone out and are recording it. And if they haven't caught on to the prank at this point, what you say is, make sure this is loud on video, hey, that's not really working for me. I need you to put just a tip in your mouth and try sucking on it. Let's see if that works for me.
You're a jerk.
What are you? After you've got the engine running, the next thing you need to do is move the airplane to the run-up area. So what you do is you push the throttle forward and pull the yoke back. If you've driven any type of a motorcycle or a manual car, you know how a clutch works. So in this scenario, you're basically making the yoke the clutch, and obviously the throttle or the gas is the gas. And you do that a couple times. Then you teach them how to do it. Of course, when they go to do it, you keep your feet firmly on the brake. Anybody that's driven a manual car knows what it's like to miss the clutch and you rev the engine. That's basically what it's going to seem like they're doing. So you do that once or twice, and then on the third try, you let them move forward. And then you see how long they keep pulling back on the yoke and pushing the throttle forward to move the aircraft forward. Now that you've taught them how to do a proper walk around and how to move the aircraft forward, the obvious next step is teach them how to steer the aircraft. If you aren't familiar, most small aircraft are steered with the rudder pedals, which are at our feet. On a larger aircraft, we have something called the tiller, which we use our hand and our feet in some cases to move the aircraft. But your typical small aircraft is just going to be using your feet to steer. If you have an unprepared and a new student pilot, they don't know that you steer the plane with your feet. Which means when they start to steer, they're going to assume you're going to steer with your yoke, because that's how every car works, right? So your first couple turns, of course, you're going to use the yoke to appear that you're steering, even though you're using your feet. Then you tell them you need to write a few things down. You're going to let them make the first turn and you're going to use your feet while they're just using the yoke to steer. And then, of course, on the second turn, it's not going to work. And by the time they get the yoke back to neutral, you're going to grab the yoke and turn it really quickly, and you're going to give them one of those flight instructor sneers that all of you guys like to give, or at least they love to give me. This look out of the corner of your eye like, what are you doing?
You are such a f***ing moron.
And then from that point on, they'll probably keep doing that until their check ride, because it'll just be such a bad habit that you taught them. And of course, if you're like any of my flight instructors, you say, I need you to do better next time. And then, of course, the student will feel totally stupid, or at least I did. Now if you're up flying, if your student is anything like I was as a pilot, they're probably looking out the window while you scream altitude, altitude every 5 seconds at them, which did not help me at all. This white wheel that you see right here is a trim wheel. The trim wheel is used to pitch the aircraft for a given airspeed to hold a given altitude. That trim wheel can be trimmed so the plane will descend or climb without doing anything with the yoke. The yoke is how you turn the plane left and right and how you pitch the plane up and down. So if you hold the yoke and hold all the pressure off and trim the aircraft to go down, but hold all the pressure, they won't know the aircraft is trimmed to pitch down. They'll just assume that your hand is on the yoke, which is not uncommon for a student pilot to be flying with their flight instructor holding onto the yoke. So while they're looking out the window, you're holding onto the yoke and you're keeping all the pressure off and you trim the aircraft down, maybe down a lot. And you're holding on with that yoke so they don't feel any pressure difference. And you keep trimming it down, trimming it down, trimming it down. Then you say something like, I've never seen that button before. Have you touched that button before? And they're probably going to say, no, never have. So you say, yeah, just go ahead and push that button. I'm curious to what it does. Once they push it, you let go of the back pressure and the yoke is going to push forward and the plane is going to start going towards the ground rapidly. Their reaction is probably going to look at you something like, oh please, I don't want to die, please. Of course, you'll have to grab the yoke back and pull it back up so you don't break your altitude, maybe 100 or 200 feet. You pull it back up and trim it out. And of course, they'll never ever push that button again. Now this is kind of a tricky city because I'm in downtown. It's kind of hard to figure out where I'm at, but I'm in Hotlanta in the dirty, dirty South.
Peace up. A-Town.
Now, if you haven't already shared this video with your friends that are in flight school or getting ready to go to flight school, then that's just mean and you're just setting them up to be humiliated. And a quick note here, before you think I would never fall for any of these pranks, realize that when you're new into an aircraft, your brain can only process so much information at one time. And that's why in some of my other videos I talk about being prepared before you go, take a check ride, or do anything. You want to be so over-prepared so your brain and your mind can process new pieces of information more easily. So once you're new to aircraft, you're basically having sensory overload and you're making or saying things that you would normally never do and you're sounding a lot stupider than you normally would be. So you might be watching this thinking, I would never do that, I'm not that stupid. But the reality is, once you have sensory overload, you'd be surprised how stupid things that you do are. And I know that from personal experience. If you're someone who's seen me walking around the airport, you may have noticed that I always have a backpack with me. And if you're someone who's seen me walking around the airport with my backpack and all my gear and you've come up and said hi, sometimes I'm not as friendly as you might have expected or hoped I'd be. And that's because sometimes I may have just gotten off a 15-hour flight and after that my brain turns to mush and I'm just walking around a bit like a robot trying to get on my plane to go to the hotel and go to sleep. But one of the things you may have noticed is that with all the gear that I have is a backpack. I've had a backpack and I used it through flight school and I still carry it today up to the flight deck. I keep all my flight stuff that's in that backpack. And in flight school I used to keep water in there, I used to keep snacks in there because I get horribly grumpy when I'm hungry. So I'd bring all that stuff and I'd throw it in the back seat of the plane when I'd go for a flight training. In this prank, you have to set it up ahead of time. When the student comes to you and says they're going to go pre-flight the aircraft, you tell them to double check the oil. Because just recently, there was a plane that crashed because it didn't have enough oil in it and the engine seized up. So after you taxied the runway and take off, watching them steer with the yoke, you get up in the air. Once they're up in the air, you point to the engine instruments and you say, man, that engine's getting really hot, so go ahead and pull it back a little bit. Again, because you're new, your brain is not going to process what is the temperature normally at because that's not something you're just concerned with flying the plane and keeping it straight and level, let alone looking at all the instrument gauges. So you'll get the student pilot to pull it back a little bit, then pull it back a little bit more. And then you start getting nervous in your voice saying, man, this does not look good. This engine is really heating up. Are you sure you checked the oil? Of course, they're going to say, yes, I've double checked it twice, just like you said, because most student pilots are really trying to do their very best. Eventually, you have to get really anxious with your voice and you say, oh my gosh, I never wanted this to happen. Crap, I can't believe we're going to have to crash the plane. Grab your parachute and then reach into the back and pull your backpack up. They're, of course, going to be looking at you like, what parachute? And you're going to say, okay, well, we don't have a choice now. I'm going to jump out of the plane and you're going to have to jump out too. Of course, the look on their face is going to be something like,
You gonna do what?
Speaking of student pilots scared to be flying, if you never saw the Hollywood vs. Reality I did on Executive Decision, it's about a student pilot getting to fly a 747. If you haven't seen that video, I'll put a link to it right here. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.